Great. So why people leave companies? And I brought a study or a survey from Korn Ferry. If you don't know Korn Ferry, it's a very well-known research institute from the US. A lot of the models that HR softwares use in the mainly known HR softwares comes from studies done by Korn Ferry. So it's a very reputable research institute. And in 2022, they ran a survey to show that employees are not waiting for a safety net before they say, I quit. And more than a third of professionals that were surveyed say that they either recently have or are planning on leaving their job without another one lined up. The biggest reason to leave a job, according to the survey, is company culture, followed by, it said there, a bad boss, but I think that has to do mostly with the just general management, right? And then increased salary benefits came in at third, at 22%. So this is from an article from Korn Ferry called The Big Quit. And you probably are aware, because we're all in the HR field, of these hashtags that were trending about a year ago, Quiet Quitting and the Great Resignation. So people leave, and it's important for companies to understand the reasons why, in order to act accordingly to be able to retain the talent in the companies. Now, what we find is that the reason why people leave is because people drift apart. All of us have experienced what happens when we don't make time to connect and stay tuned with our teams. And that's because life gets on the way. We're all busy chasing our goals and finishing our projects, and we often misalign because we just don't communicate frequently. So anything that has to do with management, with benefits or salary, or even company culture, it just doesn't get shared in order to find remedial solutions. And that's why then people decide to leave companies. So what we find is that the traditional way of reviewing work and allowing for the communication to happen, where we get to speak about how are you doing in the company, is designed to be had through KPIs and OKRs. So KPIs, we could think of the standard job description that any role in any company comes with, to say, okay, person, if you're going to perform in this role, these are the things that the role entails, what I'm going to be measuring, your role through. And then OKRs usually relate to companies saying, okay, this is our mission, this is how we break it for the year, this is how we break it for the quarter per team, right? And then again, we could have people that are measured through OKRs. And again, what we find is that these systems don't necessarily serve the purpose of retaining talent. So the moment that you're having the conversations around how do you measure up to a KPI or how do you measure up to an OKR, you're not necessarily serving the conversation of retaining that talent. Having said that, I do think there's a space for KPIs and OKRs in organizations. KPIs are really helpful for inductions. When you have someone new in a business, you want to give them some guidance as to what they will be working on, what their role is about. And OKRs also have a place in the organization because it helps put some sort of like vision for teams in terms of what are we working towards, right? So what happens with these systems as well is that they take up to 20% of managerial time to set KPIs, to set OKRs, to track them, and also to get updated, because they often become unupdated, these systems. So it takes a lot of time from management to actually drive and champion these systems. And this is often the reason why these systems don't end up working, because they end up being dropped somewhere along the line. So our findings is that these both systems to review work are labor intense, and they don't often lead to actionable insights to retain talent. So what we find is a better way to review work is ask your team members to share their highlights, their stress and energy levels on a weekly basis. So what you need to consider here is that the frequency, the weekly basis. It's quite an important one. And then also the fact that we ask for highlights. The reason why this is important is because the moment you engage with your team members and you ask them about their highlights of the week, what you're doing is saying to that person, hi person, tell me what was important for you this past week at work, and what did you do for the company this particular week. So you can see how we're turning the conversation around from saying, hey, individual, this is the KPI, this is the OKR, let's see how you measure, which becomes an abstract conversation. While this is turning the conversation around, we're asking people, what were you busy with the past week? And then the reason why we ask for stress and energy levels, and take note of this, we are asking people about them. We're not measuring them with a watch. We are just asking. So it's perception of stress and energy levels. The reason why that's important is because these are two very important measures of people's well-being. People are not going to be able to perform well for the company if there's high levels of stress on a frequent basis, if the energy levels are down in a frequent basis. It's okay to have variation because we all go through life, but the moment we see this frequently, we know this person is not on top of their game, right? So these are the three questions that we find help review work with the purpose of retaining talent. Now, this process of reviewing work on a weekly basis, we call it pulsing. And I think the word is telling, it's pulsing, it's getting a feel for how people are doing in the business. And it's a really powerful exercise to have everybody in your organization being pulsed on a weekly basis, because all of a sudden you have an influx of information that's coming from your people telling you how they're doing, right? So the findings, when you ask people what was the highlight of your week, and you ask them how are the stress and energy levels, is that you will get to hear if people are enjoying their job and how the stress and energy levels fluctuate on a weekly basis. So that is in itself a really powerful exercise. If you want to take it a level higher, then you need to feedback loop this information. You need to ask the managers, hey manager, what do you think of this highlight from this person? And take note of the stress and energy levels of this person for this week. So now managers can keep a pulse on the floor, on their team, and proactively act on issues that are identified early on for possible retention blockers. So let's say someone wrote a highlight and they said, to be honest, this week it was, I couldn't achieve the things that I wanted to set myself to. There was too many interruptions. I had to attend many calls or whatever the situation is. Then, okay, we see there's some sort of misalignment. This person went through something. And because this is a weekly process, we will be able to identify patterns. And then it's up to the manager to use this information to proactively act on it before it snowballs and the person is thinking, you know what, I had it. I need to, this is not for me anymore, and they leave. How many times from the HR consultancy services have we heard founders and managers say, and the person left and we didn't know? Well, if you have a system like this in place, you will know what's going on with your people in your organization. Okay, now, again, if you want to take it another level up, not only pulsing employees, not only feedback looping, the next thing is to try find alignment. Alignment is a really big thing to be identified in between the relationship of an employee and a manager, right? So when it comes to highlights, when we feedback loop the information to the manager, we say to the manager, how do you feel about this highlight? It wasn't well executed, development is needed, it was well executed, it exceeded expectations, or created a new standard. And then you could do a very similar exercise when it comes to cultural fit, which is another key aspect of talent retention. If people are enjoying the culture of your company, So the manager to say, this person is not aligned. Sometimes this person is aligned. Yes, this person is always aligned. This person exceeds expectations or creates a new standard. So what you can see here, this alignment exercise, it's very much a rating. You can see you have 5 options there. So it is a 1 to 5. But why we make it a conceptual rating, or we call it sentiment tagging, is because that is what allows us to find alignment or misalignment, which is a very visual and clear exercise, to report on alignment or not. So the finding with this exercise of having managers sentiment tag highlights, as well as questions related to cultural engagement, it helps identify misalignment or alignment. And then what we can do with this exercise is that now we can create reporting. Why reporting is important is because everything that you have heard up to now, it's qualitative, right? It's about retention, it's about connection. Now, it's important that we can translate this into quantitative data because we need to be able to look at the patterns and look at the insights, right? So the moment you have qualitative or sentiment tagging for both aspects, be it cultural alignment and also highlights that relate to the work done, so that's performance, you will be able to come up with a very visual tool for your team or for your organization, which is putting into using the 2 variables and putting them into 2 axes, where you can say, okay, this is a 1 to 5 for performance of the pulsing exercise, and this is a 1 to 5 for the cultural fit. So now, if the person on an average rating is a 3, right? So that would be well executed or yes, always aligned, then the person will come around the middle of this tool. While if the person is excelling when it comes to their weekly highlights and their cultural engagement, then they're going to be on top. And you can therefore understand also that if they're not doing so well, they're going to be at the bottom of this tool. So here's a legend of how to read. This is called the 9-box matrix tool. It's a very well-known HR tool. And what we find is that it represents visually, it maps visually where your people is at. And this is a very good tool for career development, because what this will allow you to do and your HR department is to say, okay, if someone is not performing, so they will usually be around this area, then this is what HR can do together with a manager. We can run a poor work performance review, or we could even consider a termination if we think it's the non-performance is dire. If we find there's no cultural alignment, then we could consider counseling the person, we could consider doing warnings, termination. These actions are quite location dependent, to say it in a way. In South Africa, it will be different from the UAE or Saudi. But what I'm trying to say is that you are able to identify that something is not aligned and you can act on it. Now, on the other side, if you have people that are performing really well and are culturally aligned, then what HR should prompt is to say, is this person ready for a promotion? Is this person ready for a career development plan to be put in place? Or do we consider this person for a lateral move? So with a very quick and visual tool, now HR can become really strategic to the management team because they can help with actions to make sure that people are aligned and also to retain the talent in the company. So a big takeaway from this workshop is that for you to be able to become strategic, when I say you, I say the HR department, when it comes to talent retention, is to identify the people that are doing very well in your business and you want to retain, but the same way to identify the people that are falling behind. Because if you want to retain talent, you need to be on top of your game of who are the people that are really striving in your company from the people that are not necessarily pulling their weight forward. And sometimes, people may think this is, like you could try harder, but the reality is that if we don't action on things like this, we are doing a disservice to the company and also to that person, because sometimes it only takes a conversation to bring alignment and for people to go from here to here, right? This tool, we use it on a quarterly basis. We map out employees on a quarterly basis. It's amazing to see how people can move because the alignment exercise took place, or also how people end up leaving. So again, it's a really powerful tool to track the staff movement in your company. Okay, so for now, the biggest takeaways from this workshop is that for companies to retain talent, our findings are that pulses on a weekly basis, asking about the highlights of people's weeks, then feedback loops to managers, so they become aware and they can pulse their own team and they know where everybody's at, with the alignment exercise, that sentiment tagging, because it allows HR and also managers to understand who's aligned and who's misaligned. Then visual reporting, which is what I have just shown you, to understand where everybody's at in your business, and then the action steps. I cannot stress enough how important action steps are. It really is the make or break of this whole system, because what you want to be able to achieve with a system like this is that things are happening, things are being identified, and actions are being taken place from, the whole process. Okay, now after listening to all of that, you might think, okay, Rose, but how long does it take to put a process in place like this of pulses, feedback loops, alignment, visual reporting, and action steps? The findings are that it takes 5 minutes to complete a pulse on a weekly basis from an employee point of view. And also it takes 5 minutes from a manager to review a pulse on a weekly basis. So it takes 2 hours per employee, and it takes 2 hours per manager per year. Now, as we saw before, OKRs and KPIs, setting those systems, tracking those systems, updating them takes 20% of managerial time. So this exercise, pulses, it's a much more time-efficient exercise and a much more accurate exercise for the purpose of retaining talent. Now, when it comes to implementation, if you say, Rose, I love this system, I want to try it in my company, you could implement this system on your own with tools to your, that you will have available to you. So what you will need is a form for data collection where you build your weekly highlight form. Then you need the backend. So that's where you store your data. So usually, let's say you use Google Forms, then Google Forms, you can link it to a spreadsheet, right? If you use Airtable, same. So a lot of tools have that form and backend. Now, when you collect the data on a weekly basis, you need monitoring. And the monitoring happens on the sentiment analysis that you will be doing on the pulses that are coming through. Are people aligned? Are people misaligned? And then what you need to do is to feedback loop this information that you have gathered on a weekly basis to every manager in charge of the team so they can give feedback. So that can become quite strenuous, to say it in a way, if you have bigger teams, because now you have to automate emails to be sent to managers with the information that's relevant to them. But it's possible. And then what you need to do as HR is to be in charge of creating this reporting, this 9-box metrics tool that we saw, which you could do on a quarterly basis, again, to have snapshots of how everybody's moving in the organization, and for HR to champion the action steps, to engage with each manager and say, hey, manager, this is your 9-box metrics. What are we doing with the people on the bottom? What are we doing with the people on top, right? So that implementation, as I said, you can do it all on your own with very simple tools that you have available to you, but it will take you time because, as I said, there's monitoring and there's feedback looping that you'll have to do manual. Now, obviously, in the era of tech, we want to automate everything, and there's definitely a way to automate this process. So that is something that we have delved into and we're very passionate about. How do we make this process automated? And we came up with a concept of Pulse on WhatsApp. the reason why we like to use WhatsApp, it's because it's a widely spread tool. Everybody uses it. And we have an HR bot that very much collects the data on a weekly basis for us, puts it on a back end. That's sentiment analysis through an AI recognition tool, and feedback loops that information automatically to the WhatsApp of the manager, creates the report automatically, and gives it to the HR team, as well as the founders and the executive team, to say, this is the snapshot of your workforce on a quarterly basis, and prompts you to take action. So this automated tool, we call it Pulse, which is an AI-powered WhatsApp HR chatbot that helps companies retain talent. And in case you're curious to see the visual, right, of how this looks, we spoke about the weekly feedback loops. So this is how it looks on WhatsApp when the bot asks for highlights on a weekly basis, and then loops back that information to the manager. Here's the sentiment tagging exercise, and here is to elaborate further on that selection, and then that gets fed back to the employee on a weekly basis, which completes the weekly feedback loop. And here you can see as well what this tool does, which is weekly reporting on energy level, stress levels, which we collect on a weekly basis. So now the manager can say, okay, this is how my one individual or another individual energy level. So people are high on energy, stress levels are low, so things are going well. And this process happens on a weekly basis, which means that you're going to be able to track variance, which is the important thing when it comes to energy and stress. Not so much the finding of 1 week, but the finding of the variance week on other week, right? Okay, here's what with Pulse we managed to do is this the cycle of employees doing weekly logs, managers giving weekly feedback, getting weekly reporting so they can act on the findings, and also getting quarterly reporting for the management and executive team to know where everybody is, and also the team map out of the 9box metrics tool. Great. So that's the end of the presentation. As I said, this system that we use, which is on WhatsApp, you're more than welcome to try it out. You can either, if you want to give the HR chatbot a try, we're more than happy to let you use a trial. You just need to either take a picture of the QR code, or I'm going to put a link now on the chat where you can just click on it, and then it will appear the chat conversation, so you can start using the bot. Cool. So that's the end of the presentation. Now, as I said, I'm going to give 5 minutes for questions that you may have. And if you think that you want to take the conversation further,